Welcome to the Sustainable Jersey Virtual Summit happy hour on the road less traveled. We're really excited to have you here. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Ann Heasley, the Program Manager for Policy and Planning at Sustainable Jersey, and I'm joined today by Megan McFarland, who's our Program Coordinator, and we're really excited to talk to you about roads and share some thoughts and think about how we might use our roads differently because our lifestyles have changed, and maybe some of those changes we want to adopt as permanent changes. So just want to explore that today. And I don't have this isn't a really content heavy webinar, it's a happy hour. And so I have some thoughts, a bunch of resources that I think might be interesting to talk about. And then we've put together a little poll of some questions to see what you guys are experiencing, and then hopefully have a lot of time for just hanging out and talking. But before we get started with the things I wanted to share, Megan's going to go over some just general housekeeping for the session, as well as some Sustainable Jersey announcements. And my apologies to several of you who have seen these announcements and probably could give them, but we want to make sure that everybody knows about all this great stuff. So Megan, you want to go for it?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Anne. I'm sure everyone has been on a million Zoom calls by now, but this is just an easy, quick way to help us navigate through this discussion, since I know these can get a little hectic if everyone's trying to speak at once. So we just ask that if you aren't speaking, if you could just mute yourself just to avoid any accidental background noise. And if someone else is speaking and you want to speak but don't feel like you want to cut them off, you can use your navigation bar to go to the participants and raise your hand. I'll be monitoring that as well as the chat the whole time, so that will be a little more accessible for you. And then we also encourage everyone to share any resources or contact information that they want to in the chat. And already covered the discussion poll, so we're going to launch that as soon as she starts going over her resources. So we really encourage everyone to participate in that. And then if you don't feel like speaking and you just want to sit back and you agree with what anyone's saying, you can always use the reaction buttons on your navigation bar. As far as Sustainable Jersey, again, like Ann said, I'm sure some of you have heard this a million times, so I don't want to go too in depth with it, but we have made certification changes to our municipal and school cycle to be more flexible to towns and municipalities. So you can find out more information about that on our website, or if you have any questions, you can email the program manager, Samantha McGraw, or the school's program coordinator, Veronique Lambert. We also have a lot of resources on our website. The energy team has been working towards energy toolkits and efficiency outreach trainings, so that'll be available on our website. We have a free municipal technology coaching opportunity, which helps municipalities navigate virtual everything right now. So that is everything available on our website. And then our census response initiative that we've been working towards, just to help towns and schools raise awareness for the census and why it's important. So, and if you want weekly updates on this, we have our weekly e-blast that goes out, and it has the most current information. So we definitely encourage you to sign up for our mailing list. And this is the last week of our Sustainability Summit. If you wanted to see any recordings from any of the events that we've had, or the recording of this will be posted tomorrow on our website, you can visit our Sustainability Summit page. I think this is the second to last event we have, which is sad, but everything will be on our website. And then finally, we just wanted to thank our sponsors. We have our program underwriters and our summit sponsors, and without them, we couldn't do any of this and work from home and navigate all of this going on. So we just wanted to say thank you to them, and that's it. So I'll just turn it over back to Anne with her resources.
Great, thanks a lot, Megan. So back about 2 months ago when we started switching over from an in-person summit to a virtual summit. One of the things that we really love about the summit is we get to meet you in person and we get to talk to you and share ideas. And that's hard to do on a webinar. So someone in our office, I think maybe Lauren, um, oops,
Oh,
oops, we got maybe mute
oh,
somebody.
I got
Oh,
it.
okay. um, uh, we switched over and we thought, well, let's do some happy hours where maybe it's just an opportunity for us to get together and talk about ideas, some of the things that we don't get to do in our more formal presentations. And I don't know about you, but I found myself when we were sent home, I found myself walking and exploring my community more and finding myself, because the roads were used less, that I was walking on portions of roads I normally never would walk on because they'd be too highly trafficked, but realized, wow, this road is a really big and important connector, and I might not have noticed that. So I just sort of had this idea for a session, and then I'm part of what's called the Complete Streets Working Group, which is something that the Tri-State campaign started with the Voorhees Transportation Center Safe Routes to School program. It's a group of people that get together and talk about complete streets once a month. And in one of those meetings a couple months ago, someone mentioned that some towns and some municipalities are starting to close their streets to allow for more places for social distancing while exercising, biking, or walking. And while I'm talking about the Complete Streets Working Group, I do want to just flag the first reference here, which is the Complete and Green Streets for All model policy and guide that was developed by the working group in conjunction with the New Jersey Department of Transportation that released it. They helped finish up and make it a really useful toolkit and guidebook. And here's a link to that. If you're interested in complete streets and really thinking about equity in your roadway, the importance of your roadway for health, for the economics of your community because of the roadways, all these things are, and how your roads can be important for handling stormwater. All of these things are put together in this really great policy and guide. And Sustainable Jersey has used this new best practice to help us update our actions. So in the months ahead, you'll see us referring back to this in an update to our Complete Streets action. You want to do the next slide? So yeah, at the working group, we started to talk about, places like Milan, they're closing their streets, and not only are they closing it now, but maybe they're going to keep them closed. And next slide. We saw in the United States, Oakland and Denver were really early on in closing their streets to provide for places for people to walk and bike. And, I put a reference to the Oakland site and some other sites, but when they were thinking about where to close streets, they were looking at some places where where there's high density and maybe not good access to parks. They were looking at places that were high trafficked, where people were walking a lot to get to businesses or resources. And they were also looking to identify street closures related to places where there are vulnerable users. And so there's some really great, interesting stuff that's going on because we see that our roads are being used less. You want to go to the next slide? And, there's this amazing resource. A professor, Tabitha Combs at the University of North Carolina Department of City and Regional Planning has cataloged nationally and internationally all these different street closures, and she provides links on this updated Google spreadsheet, and it talks in categories of like short-term closures or long-term closures, because we are seeing that some communities like Seattle experimented with closing to through traffic a number of streets. And now they've just decided, they've had that in place for a month or 6 weeks, and they've decided, you know what, we're just going to make this permanent. So it's really great to think about it, not just think about the change gradually, or maybe it's a bigger change, but just sort of capitalizing on that change. So next slide. And as we move closer to home, another resource that I think, if you're interested in this topic, you'd be really interested in the Safe Routes to School resources on the Voorhees Transportation Center. Well, I've given you a link, and Leanne Von Hagen is on the call. And Leanne, I don't know if you can wave your hand. I don't know if everybody can see it, but and maybe I'll have you do it later, but you're a resource for anybody on this call if you're interested in how to move about your community safely. And these tips, they have some great tips on their website, and that's where this link takes you for safe walking and biking. And it's for school kids, but it's also for all of us. And they provide some great links to other resources. You want to go to the next slide? And so other things that are happening out there are, we've switched over, and the month of May, typically bike month, and typically something that your transportation management associations celebrate, and they're not stopping that celebration. In fact, this year a number of in New Jersey banded together and developed this program called You Ride, We Give. So if you pledge to do a ride, they'll make a donation to a food bank. And so Sarah, I think you're on, and maybe I'll have you wave your hand later, because you're from RideWise, one of the TMAs that is sponsoring this. And maybe when we open it up for discussion, you could just give us an update on how that's going. It seems like a really great thing. And then next slide, we have, let's see, I am seeing your poll. I don't know. Can everybody see the slide, or just the poll?
I see the poll.
Okay.
Yeah, poll.
Okay, maybe I can, there we go. Oops. Did you do that, Megan, or did I?
Now no slide. We had
Yeah.
had the slide before.
Well, all right, so there's really just one more slide actually two more slides. There's a slide that shows this, oh, here we go. Megan's on it. Thank you, Megan. Which is another kind of interesting project. And I know that Christine Symington from Sustainable Princeton, I don't know if she signed on, but she did sign up. But they have this great resource if you're out walking, and they've partnered with the Watershed Institute and maybe some other organizations to pick up trash as you're out walking. And then if you want to go the next step and photograph what you picked up, and then share it on social media. So people are thinking, differently, because we're seeing our roads differently and seeing opportunities. And then the final slide is the other thing that I'm starting to hear about is that as we think about maybe life, some portions of life returning to normal someday, we may have restaurants open again, and they may be looking for places to expand. And oftentimes that might be the sidewalk in front of their business, or maybe a portion of the roadway. So there are some towns that are closing streets to allow for more opportunities for dining outside. So I don't know if Joe Gorilla, I know that Asbury Park Joe Grillo's on our staff and he signed up. I'm not sure if he made it on, but he lives in Asbury Park and I know they're looking at that. And I know that also, let me just see, there are other folks that are looking, other communities in New Jersey that are looking at making some changes too. So that's one of the questions in the poll. And let's see, how are we doing? Have people answered the poll? That's all the slides that I have. Are we?
It looks like we have 44% response to the poll. So if we want to give everyone like another minute or so to work on it.
Okay, maybe we could go to the overall view and like so that people can see each other.
This, I'll just stop sharing my screen.
Yeah.
There we go.
And all those resources will be part of the, you know, you'll be able to get to them afterwards. So how's it looking on that poll?
61%, 11 out of 18. So if you want to.
Right, maybe let's open it up. It's not scientific. It's not, you know, but we just wanted to sort of get your pulse and see what's going on. So yeah, there is less traffic on our roads. Kind of knew that, but that's great to know. And then as we think about it, let's see, I don't know if we can see question 2 a little bit better. Can we slide down a little bit? Or
I'm sliding down. I don't know if.
oh,
Maybe...
there you go. I can slide down.
Okay.
I'm the poll master. We have to, yeah, like I say, we're still learning about Zoom. Most people are seeing dogs being walked. Children on bikes, that's something that I've seen a lot of. And I think it's just because they've grown over the winter, but it's kind of exciting to see that they're out there using their bikes. It'd be great if they get an opportunity to change that situation, but and then fewer cars, more delivery. We're seeing a lot of that, more biking and walking, unexpected wildlife, fewer people outside. Definitely want to talk about that because not everybody has a place to social distance outside. Let's go on to the next question. And I have others. If you answered others, maybe when we get in have our sort of free-for-all discussion, I'd love to hear from people that answered other. Are you walking more? And people are. And it's interesting, mental health and exercise are important. And some people are not able to get outside because there isn't any place that's safe or comfortable. So that's really important. That's really important. So maybe some of the tools that we talked about would be useful. So most municipalities or towns haven't made any changes. And some people are interested, which is always a great thing for us at Sustainable Jersey. We love to see that. And then there are some people that have some thoughts that they want to share. So that's great. So I'll keep the poll on the side in case we want to reference it. But if people want to go ahead and, if they can, show their lovely face. So it's more like a happy hour. And
we did get a couple comments in the chat box as well.
Oh, okay. What do we got?
Well, let's see. The first note is from Leanne about Hoboken starting open streets this week. If Leanne wants to talk about that.
Yeah,
Sure.
and I mentioned Leanne as a great resource.
So open streets is the idea that you close a street to traffic.
There's also a sort of sister idea of shared streets where you might take a low traffic residential road and just make it a shared street where you put up temporary blockades that only local traffic only streets, but then there's fewer cut through traffic. And still gives a better sense of security if you're using the road to walk and bike. But Hoboken closed a street by the Hudson River. They did a pilot, I think on Saturday, and it went so well, and people kept their social distance, and they didn't see partying going on, that they made it permanent on Monday. And we're seeing a lot of that around the country. New York City is expanding them. The first to really make a big impact was the city of Oakland, California, closed 80 miles of their municipal streets through the city of Oakland. And so it hit every neighborhood. There wasn't just one side of the town that can enjoy it. It was the entire city. And they're seeing a physical activity up. People's reaction to it has been very positive. I really haven't read anything negative about it. And it's just a way to make sure that people are able to kind of enjoy the outdoors, especially in neighborhoods where they might not have access to a park or when parks were closed and that sort of thing. So, you know, there's definitely many places in the state that lack a neighborhood people could walk to safely. We don't really want people driving to other towns to use resources if we can at this point. So the more you can do to help people in their own town and to keep them out of their own vehicle is basically, you know, a big plus. So I think, and I put in there also, just because I like the term, and I see Janet Haru was on the call. I don't know if she still is, but oh, there she is. Wisconsin, Janet, is calling them active streets, and I know you'll love that term. So instead of open streets, they're called active streets. They're hopefully more encouraging people to keep getting out and keeping healthy and keeping active. So
that's interesting, because I think Oakland calls it slow streets. Like the street, the traffic should be slow. The people shouldn't. They should be active.
Right.
That's great. Thanks. How about any other questions in the chat? Or I guess I could zoom over to the chat. I don't know, Sarah, do you, Linchung, do you want to talk about the TMA's initiative and how's that's going?
Sure. Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, good. Yeah, so we thank you for mentioning You Ride, We Give. That was pretty great. We've partnered, I work for RideWise. We're a TMA that services Somerset County. And we partnered with Keep Middlesex Moving and Greater Mercer TMA, which are the TMAs that serve those counties, on an initiative called You Ride, We Give, where for Bike Month, if you sign up on the website and pledge to either for every pledge to ride your bike at least once in the month of May, we will make a donation to a food bank in our service area. And then if you can also post pictures or stories about your bike rides, and for every post and story we get, we will also make a donation. And then RideWise is doing our own separate challenge in June to kind of continue the momentum of bike riding, called, I wrote Let's Ride in the chat, but that was a mistake. It's Love to Ride Somerset. So we're using the Love to Ride platform, which I don't know if anybody has used before. It's not our own platform. We kind of signed up for a membership where you can make an account and you can log your rides. You can log every, mileage or just the number of minutes you've ridden your bike. And you can earn prizes from the website. You can be on our leaderboard. And it's just a great way to kind of, in this time of social distancing, and, we're encouraging you either ride solo or just with members of your household, but virtually you can still connect with other riders and other cyclists. Even if you just ride an exercise bike indoors, that will count towards both challenges. It's just kind of to keep everyone active, healthy, and promote a sense of community in this era of social distancing.
That's great. I love that, especially for the competitive riders out there. But it sounds like it would work for anyone. Love to ride. So I don't know if anybody who said answered that last poll question, if they had ideas to share, if they want to go ahead and share any ideas on things that they see or would like to see. Larry, it looks like you might be trying to talk. I'm not sure.
No, well, I was thinking about it because I put something in the chat, but which you haven't covered yet. When you came up with that very last slide showing the outdoor restaurants, the cafe type thing, it didn't show very good spacing in that one picture. But I was wondering how towns or maybe public policy is dealing with a spacing issue for the outdoor dining idea, which is a way to not, at least not be enclosed, but you still have to deal with spacing. And I specifically want to know what kind of town policies we might have to deal with because, for example, our Rotary is trying to put together it's in the thinking stages, of an outdoor food court idea for it being a football field, someplace that's not being used. But spacing is an issue. Town policies of how it would be organized or monitored is an issue. And the outdoor cafe seems like a good start for how are towns actually doing that? The towns who are opening it up that way, how is it being monitored? How are they, what kind of spacing is required? How, does anyone here have any ideas on that?
Yeah, no, that's a great thing. I think that picture was probably a file picture from pre-social distancing days. It was just showing how there are cafes in that town in Westchester, Pennsylvania. And I did see someone referenced an article today that Cleveland, Ohio is also doing it. But I think both of those cases are in relation to central business districts with lots of restaurants, not the idea that you're talking about, which is almost like maybe almost like a food truck kind of festival where you have food or vendors around in a football field. So maybe some of the same ideas that you use in developing a food truck festival could be used for that kind of idea. I don't know. Does anybody else have any thoughts about that?
I mean, I put in the chat about that some towns are bringing out their parklets, which is when you take over a parking space or two to create more space for people, making the sidewalks wider, putting in dining options, and using the parklets to help address social distancing for people who want to dine downtown doing outdoor dining. What's nice about the parklets is they've also proven to be an economic generator for a lot of towns, where especially on nice days like today, people may want to go sit and eat outside anyway. I can put some more resources in about towns in New Jersey. There's a lot of towns in New Jersey who use parklets, and more are growing. But some towns have pretty good websites about it, like Jersey City. So I'll put Jersey City and parklet website in there. So if anyone wanted to take a look at some of the parklets, but there's a lot of good guides out there for how to create a parklet, and I think people are modifying them for parklets during COVID.
I think that's a great idea because as you were talking about, all the images you showed of streets that are being shared are really wide streets, and we just don't have that in where I live. And a lot of in the cities, it's just really congested. That if you're lucky, you have a 4-foot sidewalk or something. So a parklet might be the way that you ease out into the road. And I know that there's part of the guidance I'm sure covers that.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. I think if you don't have space, then you have to make space and take it, and that's really what we're talking about here is changing that sort of component of our largest open space is our road network. So, you know, let's use it, and let's use it maybe differently. Did anybody else have any thoughts or ideas they wanted to share?
Can I ask a question about that parklet idea?
Yeah.
Does that include, like I've seen spaces in Jersey City where the streets are closed for street fairs or whatever, and does that include the idea of, let's say, in a town where they normally would have the traffic and the restaurants and everything else, where if the restaurant can be open with an outdoor cafe, the entire street is closed, so they actually stretch out across the street? Is that what you're talking about?
I mean, it could be. Leanne, you want to?
Yeah, I mean, you could close the street and more of a street like some towns do, but no, mostly the parklets are not about closing the streets. They're just about creating more places for people to walk and enjoy the downtown by taking over other public area. Like Anne was saying, our roads are our biggest public resource in most towns. We've got more road miles than park miles. So you could take a parking space and create a small park in it. You know, we have towns. I was just trying to look and see if I can find the Together North Jersey resources and all the North Jersey parklets, but even beyond North Jersey, at Princeton, Montclair, Bloomfield, Rahway, you know, we have a lot of examples all over Lambertville. They're not that hard to build. They're not that expensive to build. There's a lot of ways to do, even add to it bit by bit, so it's not one big expense all at once. And yet they instantly provide more space for people to sit and enjoy the outdoors. So I'll see if I can find the Together North Jersey resource on parklets in New Jersey, but there's a lot of parklets all over the country. So if you just Google parklets, you'll see a lot of resources out there.
Yeah, and I think, is it in June that there's a parklet day?
Oh, parking day is in September.
September.
Yeah, I
Okay.
think it's the first Friday in September.
Okay.
With the idea of how do you create parks everywhere? You can take over a park. A lot of towns do celebrate parking day by identifying one parking space that they make into a temporary park, a pop-up park just for the day. And just to show people it can be done. So you can look up parking day as well, because there's a lot of really great ideas, especially for the really low cost. Let's put down some pretend grass and some planters and some cones and see what we can do just for one day in this space. Just like I mentioned, Hoboken piloted their open street before they made it permanent. That often helps with towns who might be hesitant, is to say, okay, let's try it for a day or a week, and then we'll modify it as necessary or take it out if it didn't work. So we're always trying to get people to try the temporary. Let's see how it goes, monitor it, and then if it's a success, let's make it more permanent.
Yeah, I noticed that Janet put in something about in the chat about they might be too small for social distancing. That's true, but you know, I think we all have to think about you know, maybe they are used a little differently. Maybe they help identify parking spaces, or are now creating spaces for circulation for people walking if the sidewalk is being used for restaurant space or something. You know, it may be not the same old parklet, but a new reinvented parklet. But I think the idea or the concept that Leanne is talking about is something that's maybe inexpensive or temporary, and helps redivide a space and make us think about it and use it differently. But yeah, no, I think that's a great idea. I hadn't even thought about sharing. And I think the other, I didn't put it up in the slide, but speaking of parking spaces, I happened to walk by my local library, and I noticed that they painted 3 of the spaces with bright green, like a a dot and then a circle. And it turns out those 3 spaces outside the public library are parking spots where you could stand there or you can drive there and get free Wi-Fi, because obviously the public library is not open, but the public library has Wi-Fi and nobody's using that Wi-Fi. So there's an opportunity to, use that parking space, not for parking, well, for parking, but also for web access. So just again, thinking about things a little differently can probably help some people that might be running out of minutes or, looking to extend their ability to do something online. Anybody have any other ideas or questions that they want to share?
I have a question. Barbara Rogers here.
Hey, Barbara.
How are you doing? Are these things happening now? Like, are people, or is this like for future ideas? Because I'm just curious, when is this supposed to be happening? Like, or
well,
it's
some of
happening
those,
now?
yeah, some of those street closures that, like Leanne was mentioning in Hoboken, they piloted it, what'd you say, over the weekend, and now they're closing it permanently. So some of those street closures are happening now, and some of these ideas about making spaces for restaurants, people are just starting to talk about, because they're thinking that maybe someday restaurants might open again at some level, and if you had a choice of where you sat, you would probably want to pick a space that outdoors versus indoors. But so it may, so that's something that people are starting to develop. But
Okay.
some of these other ideas, Oakland, the example that Leanne mentioned, and we have a link to on the slide, that they started that weeks ago. They've been doing it for the last 6 weeks. Seattle, they've closed streets for through traffic. I know my town's thinking about doing that because they're looking at the summer months and pressure on some of our existing trails, and they want to find ways to give people at least temporarily some alternatives.
Yeah, Larry mentioned in the chat, or asked in the chat, if any towns have used closed or lesser used streets to expand or create bike lanes, which I think is interesting and would definitely help some towns, especially like my town has. We have a lot of like very small dead end streets because it's a very small town, and or just narrow streets. And we have a bike trail that runs through our town, the Henry Hudson Trail, but it's clogged up with people now because of everyone with social distancing, and you can't really social distance. So it would be nice if some towns adapted their streets to make it more accessible for people to ride their bikes and social distance.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the idea of some of these street closures, is it's not just for walking, but for biking. But I don't know if anybody's designated a bike lane. I don't know, Leanne, have you heard of that?
Not in New Jersey, unfortunately. Although, like in the shore towns, especially when for some of the shore towns is when the beach were closed and they really closed off the boardwalk too, they were using orange cones to create a walking space where the parking, usually the like pull-in parking, would be right up along the boardwalk. They coned that off and you could walk along the street because they were trying to keep people off the beaches. I don't know that when the beaches are, I guess, opening again, even though with some social distancing rule, if those will stay. But the idea is a lot of these temporary things can be done pretty quickly with a bunch of orange cones or orange barrels. You don't really need to, it's something any town really has the power to do on their own municipal streets. If you're talking about a county or a state road, it's a little different. But you don't need a whole engineering study to do a lot of this. You can try things out with the right people involved. So just like we close streets for parades, we can close streets for, in a pandemic or otherwise, or just to try something out. I'll see if I can find some resources on pop-up bike lanes, because we have a good video from Montclair, but this was also pre-COVID but I'd be happy to share that video about how Montclair did a pop-up bike to school day and had their kids use this pop-up bike lane for this one bike to school day event. But it would be a very similar concept. So I'll put that in the chat.
Yeah, I mean, there are definitely examples, like you say, of pop-up bike lanes, temporary. I think Princeton did one. I think, you know, that's definitely something towns have tried to do, but I don't know if anybody's just designated certain streets for bikes in the time of COVID. But that's definitely an interesting idea. And I think yesterday in our Complete Streets Working Group meeting, someone mentioned that one of the towns in Pennsylvania is using an index that the Delaware Valley Regional Planning Authority put together on bike stress, like roads that are difficult, looking at different levels of sort of comfort that you would have as well as use, and using that to help them identify areas that they would open up for make open streets, using that kind of thinking. So the other thing is, I noticed some town was looking at the density of parks, and if in neighborhoods, and using that to help identify streets or areas that really needed to have streets blocked off. If there aren't any neighborhood parks or places to go, you know, the road can be a really important outlet. Oh, and thank you, Leanne's putting up some great resources. I thought I saw someone else who might be trying to say something. I'm not sure.
Can I ask a quick question about that? The follow-up to the bike lane thing. I'm just, because if you have streets less traffic now, and they're closed down, and you have the pop-up bike lanes as you're talking about, things like this, it seems like an ideal opportunity to not just experiment with it, but also figure out, get people used to the idea of a bike lane, so that then they can go to their town council, whatever it is, and maybe it has to be county on certain levels, and say, we would like to make a permanent bike lane in this location. Once people get used to the idea, there's a lot of the objection, I think, maybe I'm wrong about this, in the past has been a lot of drivers in cars don't want the bike lanes. So would this be something that would be usable now, even to help set the tone?
Yeah, absolutely. I love the way you're thinking. I think that's exactly right. I mean, I think you know, some of the streets that were identified, you know, in Seattle were probably ones they were thinking about using differently, and now they tested it out and they liked it. And you know, probably the street they identified in Hoboken had some reason for why it was identified as a potential for using differently. So if nothing else, if you just start to catalog the important streets now, that would be really useful. But if you can start to make a change that people can learn to live with, that's great. The only caveat to that is that the roads are being used differently now. So something that's successful now may not carry forward just because we just don't have the same amount of traffic. But I think it's really worth trying to push those ideas.
Yeah, I would say, so what I wish we were seeing more of in this country, but we are seeing more in, you know, reports from Paris and Milan and other great European cities, is they're not going to go back to normal after COVID. They're going to try, and they have aggressive climate change policies and plans, and they're using this time to implement them. So like Milan, I understand, had a plan to put in a lot more bike lanes and infrastructure by 2030. They're doing them today. They're going to have that ready this year instead of 10 years from now, because while there's fewer vehicles on the road, is a real good opportunity to restripe the roads so that when people come back out and you don't want them going back to normal, they will get used to the new normal pretty quickly, really. So if you live in a community that does have a bicycle and pedestrian master plan, or has been thinking about this, and especially if it's in a master plan and it's already gone through approval, this would be a good time to say, what can we do to put that in now, so that when people start getting back to the new normal, this becomes part of it.
Great point. Any other ideas or questions?
I'm a little bit late, so I hope this hasn't been covered, but I was just thinking about my downtown, which is Princeton, and how receptive merchants ought to be to figuring out how to create much more open space for seating, because people would go back downtown in places where there were viable downtowns. Hopefully there will still be. But if there's no place to sit, I just don't think it can come back to life as quickly. I'm thinking of in Princeton, a chunk of Witherspoon Street that cuts through our downtown would be perfect to close off. And I can think of other streets and other centers. We'll see what happens. Maybe I'll propose it.
Yeah, and that might be, I mean, sometimes, that might be something that's done as an experiment or for a short time. And then people say, oh yeah, this works. Let's do this every week. And then let's do it every, maybe it can become something more. Because I think there's a lot of interest in supporting our local businesses, and certainly changes in the roadway can help that or hinder it depending on how it's done. So
The business is already hurting, so if we can get more foot traffic, and I mean foot, that will help the businesses. So we know from some research that people who walk or bike around town, and I know Janet knows this from her work in Princeton, do spend more in the shops. And that's what we're going to need right now. We need that more than ever. I did a survey on Bloomfield Avenue in Montclair and Bloomfield a while back. And people who answered it that they drove most often to Bloomfield Avenue said they just went to their one shop and went home. While people who walked and biked to Bloomfield Avenue visited multiple shops along the way. And that's what we need in our towns to help get them back on their feet.
yeah, that's great. So I guess they found that parking spot, they went in, they did their job, and then, but if you're walking, you're in a different sort of frame of mind, and maybe you're more open to exploring. And you reminded me, the New Jersey Bike and Pedestrian Coalition, I think, is putting together, what was it, maybe a e-blast or a blog on this whole idea of open streets in New Jersey. I'm not sure when.
I think tomorrow.
Tomorrow.
New Jersey Bike and Walk Coalition has a blog and a newsletter and a Facebook page and Twitter. So if you just look up NJ Bike and Walk Coalition, they will have a newsletter coming out about the towns that are thinking about doing these open streets or active streets, whatever you want to call them. And even county, we heard Somerset County is looking at closing some of their county roads by their county parks in order to create more of this space for social distancing.
Oh, that's great.
Somerset County, they're kind of on the forefront of things like this.
What some of our really urban cities are doing, where really space is at a premium, Newark, Trenton, any news from those? It's easy to talk about Princeton, but some of the places where people really lack parks. Does anyone have any connections?
I mean, not in New Jersey, Janet, but I mentioned Oakland earlier, and Oakland certainly isn't, or Oakland fits that bill quite nicely. I know Trenton Health Team has been had talked about this, and Trenton had done a cyclovia, And so this could really build on their ciclovia idea, which is they had a temporary road closure. I can't remember how many miles their ciclovia is for Sunday, you know, kind of like New York City has open streets 3 Sundays in August along Fifth Avenue. They did something similar in Trenton. So I know there's been talk about it, but I know they've sort of been also, a lot of the work in Trenton has been getting people to food resources. So, you know, I just don't know what the capacity is to do this as well.
Yeah, so do you have other questions or thoughts? Leanne, it's great to have you on.
You know me, once I get going, it's hard to make me stop.
Well, as I said, you're a great resource, as well as others on this call, Janet and Sarah. You know, there's a lot of great people working on street issues in New Jersey. Let's see.
Where's Leanne from?
Leanne, do you want to?
Yeah, I'll put my contact information in the chat. I'm from Rutgers University at the Voorhees Transportation Center, and my main gig is to do the New Jersey Safe Routes to School program. So if you are submitting Sustainable Jersey grants on anything that has to do with walking and biking, not grants, I'm sorry, actions.
Yeah.
Myself or my staff are the reviewers, whether it's Sustainable Jersey or Sustainable Jersey for Schools. So complete streets, safe routes to school, bike ped master plans, even anti-idling. You're looking at who you can talk to if you're confused or there's problems or you want to know why the action's written this way and not that way. You know, I'll put my contact information in chat. You can reach out to me directly.
Yeah, and we're I think that contact is on some of our actions, but we're working our way to get that contact on all of our actions. So I don't know if we've exhausted this topic or we just have too much competition with the sun. But I'll leave it open in case anybody wants to ask more questions, but maybe we can wind up here in a minute. Does anybody have any further thoughts? Well, I do want to thank you for calling in, and it was great to see that some of you are interested in some resources. Maybe that's something beyond what we did today we can work on. It really is amazing how our world has changed, and you know, this just seems like an exciting opportunity to do something different with our roads, and it would be really, really great to see if we get some great some changes that are more permanent in New Jersey. So I'll give people a, Leanne, any last thoughts?
I mean, anything we can do to make it easier and safer and more pleasant for people to walk and bike, and you have any questions, reach out. We try and we have a help desk. So that's what we're funded by New Jersey Department of Transportation. They want to see more people walking and biking so that we can address climate change, address congestion, address, you know, any other traffic safety and fatalities. So if I don't know it, I usually can connect you to somebody who does. So feel free to reach out. And even if you want to call and leave a message, it comes to my email at home. So I'll be able to call you back.
That's handy.
It is handy. Everything went digital at Rutgers about 2 years ago. And so we were actually pretty good, in pretty good condition to just completely work at home for now. It was pretty seamless.
A big thank you very much.
Oh, yeah.
Very informative.
Yeah. Thank you. All right. Take care, everybody. Get outside.
Bye. Thank you.
All right. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone.